This episode brought to you by MeepleRealty.com, your source for high-quality custom board game inserts. Meeple Realty, think inside the box. Charterstone is a legacy game, and what that means is that players will make permanent changes to the board and cards by drawing or writing on them, as well as adding stickers to the board. Players will start out with access to only a very small portion of the contents of the game. It's vitally important that players do not open anything unless specifically told to do so by in-game instructions. To prepare for the Charterstone campaign, the first thing players should do is locate the index box. When players open the index box the first time, all of these cards will be wrapped in various decks in shrink wrap. Players need to open up each individual package, being careful not to look at the cards too much, and then place them back in the box in the same order. They'll already be in numerical order. There's a number at the bottom right corner of each card. Players may notice gaps in the numbers between certain types of cards. This is normal, and as long as the cards are in order, that's all that matters. Specifically, cards 163 through 199 and card 399 are missing. If any of the decks look identical, the players should contact Stonemaier Games immediately. Next, at least one player should become familiar with the core concepts of the game by reading the Chronicle or watching a how to play video such as this one. Either way, it's not necessary to learn any rules before Charterstone's first game, but having one person familiar with it will improve the overall flow of the game. It can also be helpful to check the Stonemaier Games website for the most recent FAQ. This video will be as up to date with the FAQ as possible, but players may also find the FAQ at the link located in the description of this video. The FAQ is sectioned so as to not spoil various parts of the game, and players should read the appropriate section at the appropriate time. Now, during the campaign, it's recommended that, if possible, the same number of people should play the entire Charterstone campaign. However, it is possible also to drop or add players if necessary after Game 1. To add a player, let them choose an inactive charter and give them one random constructed or unconstructed building from the advancement deck. Note that I'm only showing you a constructed building card right now because all the unconstructed buildings in the game that I have are from unlocked crates, and I'm not going to show you any spoilers. Also, assign that player an equitable amount of glory compared to the other players in the game, and an equitable amount of capacity. To drop a player, just see Rule 2, which will be unlocked after the second game. When 1 to 6 players have gathered for their first game, players should extract card number 1 from the index and read it out loud. You'll find on card number 1 this sticker, which goes onto the spot for Story 1 in the back of the rule book. Hopefully you'll also affix it to the space a little better than I did so you don't have this obnoxious little overlap. We'll start going through the instructions of what these cards say to do before the first game in just a moment, but keep in mind that at the bottom of these cards, many of them will say extract another card from the index. I'm not going to mention each time a card says that, so just pay attention before you archive any cards that you draw. Players may share the reading duties if they wish, or one player can be the primary reader. It's also encouraged, however, that players check each other's reading of the rules and interpretation of the rules every time a new one is revealed. Players will be instructed to then unfold the game board onto either side. Now would be a good time to point out that the game board is double-sided with 2 identical sides. That way, after you finish the campaign on one side, you can purchase a recharge pack and begin it on the other. The Scriptorium tuck box is where players will store global components from game to game, and during the game, these global components form the general supply. In the tuck box, players will find 36 coins, 72 resources, a Charterstone, and a progress token. Also, there will be several extra plastic bags in the Scriptorium. These 36 coins and 72 resources are the general supply at the beginning of Game 1. This board represents your village. And the village is divided into 6 charters: blue, red, purple, green, yellow, and black. Each charter has 6 hexagonal plots within it. Each charter will belong to one player, and if players like, they should now adjust their seating so they are closest to their charter. The players now claim the charter chest belonging to their specific charter. And notice that not only are the colors the same, but each charter has its own particular symbol as well. The players should now open their charter chest and remove their 2 workers, their victory point marker, and 12 influence tokens. Keep in mind that there's no difference between these 2 workers, even though they're different sizes. Next, players should extract cards 200 through 205 from the index and match them to each player. These are going to be the persona cards for that charter. For any inactive charter, place this persona card in that charter's charter chest. Next, each player should name their persona by writing the name in this box right here. This is who that player will be for the duration of the campaign. Next, players should extract cards 5 through 10 from the index and give each player the card that matches their charter. The cards for any inactive charters should be set aside for the moment. These cards feature basic resource buildings where players will place workers to gain one of the indicated resource. Each player should then remove their building from the card and place it on any plot within their charter. Keep in mind that buildings must be oriented the same way as every other building on the board. Players now keep their constructed building card in front of them face up, as they'll need it later. And regardless of the number of human players in a game of Charterstone, there are always 6 founding villagers, so each will operate a different charter. If there are fewer than 6 players currently playing the game, affix each remaining building sticker to a plot in the indicated inactive charter. The constructed building cards for the inactive charter should be placed on the advancement mat for now. The game will eventually introduce a way for inactive charters to grow, but if at any time players would instead like these charters to act more like human players, they'll need to use the Automa rulebook. If players are playing solo games, the Automa rulebook is absolutely necessary. However, in a multiplayer game, it's recommended to not use the Automa rulebook until after game 2 or later. The Automa rulebook is absolutely necessary in a solo game. However, it's recommended that in a game with 2 or more players, it's only used after game 1 or possibly even after game 2. Next, the cards will instruct players to extract cards 206 through 218 from the index. These will be 8 assistant cards and 5 objective cards. The assistant cards should be placed on the advancement mat and the objective cards on the objective mat. You will soon shuffle all the cards on each of the mats into their respective decks. Next, players are instructed to open the Chronicle and proceed with the setup instructions located at Rule 4. Before Game 1, the general supply should contain 36 coins, 72 resource tokens. Also included in the general supply is 5 random face-up advancement cards on the mat. Reveal them from the shuffled deck of advancement cards. At the beginning of the game, the deck of advancement cards will consist of constructed building cards and assistants. Next, players reveal 3 objectives for the game. Players now place the progress token on the space of the progress track that corresponds with the player count. So in a 2-player game, it goes here. The guidepost space is ignored for the first game. Next, determine the first player by rolling the Charterstone. If it shows an inactive charter, roll it again until it shows an active charter. The player's personal supply should now consist of her named persona, constructed building card, 2 workers, and 12 influence tokens. She should also place her victory point marker at the 0 space on the victory point track. Also, for Game 1 only, players will start with 4 coins. As previously stated, each player has 12 influence tokens to be used on objective cards, the Quota Track, the Reputation Track, and elsewhere in the game. Each player is limited to just the 12 influence tokens per game. If a player runs out of influence tokens, she cannot take any actions that require them. And from that point forward, at the beginning of her turn, she must advance the progress token 1 space. Once an influence token is placed, it cannot be moved or removed until the end of the game. Sometimes influence may be listed as a cost, as with the Zeppelin, Charterstone, and Grandstand. In these cases, discard the influence token to the general supply unless the building's benefit indicates a specific use for the influence, such as with the Grandstand. We'll discuss more about costs and benefits a little bit later in this video. A few buildings and cards have influence as a benefit or instruct you to regain influence. These allow you to regain influence located in the general supply, not influence that has been assigned to a specific location. During the campaign, several different types of cards will be unlocked and shuffled with the discard pile into the deck on the advancement mat. All of these cards are collectively called advancement cards, and they are part of the general supply. Certain buildings, such as the market, will allow players to gain an advancement card. In that case, choose from the face-up available advancement cards. It's also possible that a building will specify a specific type of advancement card as its benefit. In that case, choose from the available face-up cards as before, but only choose from the specific type of card listed. If that card is not face-up, the player does not gain that card. After a player gains an advancement card, she immediately refreshes the space with the top card from the deck. It's important that players keep all cards in their personal supply face up. Hiding cards and the information on the cards is not allowed in the game. Sometimes players may have to pay or discard advancement cards for certain effects in the game. Create a discard pile near the advancement mat. Whenever that deck is empty, or whenever new cards are unlocked, shuffle the discard pile into the deck. These symbols, found at the bottom of Rule 7, are the different symbols players will run into during the game. Let's take a closer look at a couple of these symbols that players will run into at the beginning of the campaign. This handshaking symbol right here represents assistants. Assistants give the players a bonus when they perform some of the core functions of the village. For instance, the treasurer will allow the player to regain one of their influence tokens from the general supply anytime they use the treasury. The player can gain a face-up assistant just like any advancement card from the advancement mat by using the market. And if the player gains an unnamed assistant, as the treasurer is here, the player gets to name that assistant by writing in this space here. After the player peels the sticker off a building card to construct it, she's left with a new type of card, a constructed building card. This is still an advancement card. If the constructed building card has a crate, like this one does here, the player will keep it in her personal supply. She can then unlock the crate by using the Charterstone building. If, on the other hand, the constructed building card did not have a crate on it, then the player would place the card in the archive. The archive is the repository for all components that are no longer going to be needed. On a player's turn, she has 2 basic choices. She can either place a worker from her personal supply onto any building on the board, or she can retrieve all her workers from the board. Whenever a player places a worker, she then uses that building once by following these steps in order. If the worker is placed on an occupied building, the current worker is bumped off the building and returned to its player. Players may bump both their own workers and those belonging to an opponent. Next, the player pays the cost found at the bottom left of the building from her personal supply to the general supply. In the case of the treasury, any one resource. If the player is unable to pay that cost, then she can't place a worker on the building in the first place. And finally, the player may gain all or part of the benefit located in the top right portion of the building. In the case of the treasury, a single gold coin. Coins and resources are finite, so if none are available, then none can be gained. The commons represent buildings which were constructed prior to the player's arrival at the village. These buildings can be found clustered in the center of the village. Let's take a closer look at these buildings. At the Zeppelin, players pay 3 influence tokens to the general supply and 4 resources which will be located on the upper left of a building card to construct that building in her charter. She also gains 5 victory points. Keep in mind that the initial buildings were constructed for free, so there are no resources listed here. But in future buildings, as they are unlocked, you'll see 4 resources listed in this section of the card. At the Charterstone, players pay 2 influence tokens and 4 gold to the general supply in order to unlock a card with a crate and gain 5 victory points. At the Grandstand, players will pay 1 influence token in order to claim 1 objective and gain 5 victory points. However, this influence token is not placed in the general supply. When the Grandstand is used, the influence token is placed on the claimed objective card. We'll talk a little bit more about objective cards a little later in this video. At the Treasury, a player can pay 1 resource to the general supply to gain 1 gold. And at the Market, a player can pay 1 resource and 1 gold to the general supply to gain 1 face-up advancement card. The player uses the Charterstone building or any building with this symbol to unlock crates located on the constructed building cards. To do this, first the player will pay the 4 gold and 2 resource tokens. Next, players will refer to the index guide located in the top of the flap of the index box. To prevent spoilers, I'm not going to show that to you too closely. Also know that there is a larger guide with larger print located in the box as well. The index guide will explain to the player exactly what components to unlock based on the crate she just opened. She also gains the indicated number of victory points. In the case of the Charterstone building, it's 5. The constructed building card will be placed into the archive, and the progress token will be advanced 1 space. Many crates will contain a persona card which the player should place in her charter chest to use later. The Chronicle also mentions that there's no need to rush into unlocking a whole lot of crates in the beginning. Players should unlock at their own pace. There's a lot of information to digest, so players should take their time. Keep in mind that if a player unlocks a crate, the contents of that crate belong to her, and she should use them in the way indicated by the index. If the index says that player gains those cards, then those cards will go into the player's personal supply. It does not matter if a persona card does not match the original persona card of that player. Also, the numbers on the index guide are card numbers and should not be confused with rule numbers or story numbers. A player may use the Grandstand or any building with this target symbol as the benefit to score completed objectives. In the case of the Grandstand, the only cost is to spend 1 influence token, and the benefit is 5 victory points plus claiming that objective. So if at any point in the game the player has at least 1 of each resource, she could claim that objective as completed. When an objective is completed, the progress track moves forward 1 space. This hand symbol indicates the use of the Quota Track. When using the Quota Track, a player may sell a variable amount of a single commodity to the general supply. The player selects any open space on the Quota Track to determine the type and quantity of the commodity she wants to sell. As you can see, an influence token is the only cost of the cloud port. So if the player selected the cloud port, then she would place an influence token anywhere on the Quota Track. If she placed it there, it would be 3 resources that she would have to pay. These resources go into the general supply. The player will then gain the indicated benefit, in the case of the cloud port, 3 victory points. And if the space on the track that she chose has a bonus, she would gain that benefit as well. In this case, 1 additional victory point. Also, keep in mind that the player can choose any space. So in reality, there's no reason to choose the 3 resource spot prior to the 2 resource spot if the additional victory point is what the player wants. Also, this column here allows the player to place an influence token on the reputation track. The reputation track represents word of the village spreading throughout the land. Reputation can be gained in multiple different ways throughout the game anytime this symbol is indicated as a benefit. At the beginning of the campaign, that symbol can be found on the Quota Track as well as the Progress Track. The first token to be placed on the reputation track will be placed on the spot indicating the current player count. So in the case of a 2-player game, this is the first space to be used. Further tokens are placed on the next open space closer to the ocean. If there are no more available spaces, then a token cannot be placed. During in-game scoring, the player or players with the highest number of tokens on the track gain 10 victory points, the next highest 7 victory points, and the next highest 4 victory points. A player must have at least 1 token on the reputation track to qualify for any victory points. Also, this chart right here helps players remember how many victory points for each place. This symbol indicates income. At the beginning of the campaign, this symbol should be ignored. The progress track is the timer for the game. As previously mentioned, the number of players determines the starting space. The progress token must advance by 1 space whenever a building is built, a crate is opened, or an objective is claimed. If the player moves onto a space with this symbol, they may place 1 influence token on the reputation track. If a player causes the progress token to move onto a space with this symbol, it triggers income for all players once income has been unlocked. If a player begins her turn with no influence tokens, she must advance the progress token 1 space prior to taking her turn. When the progress token advances to this space, finish the round so that all players have an equal number of turns, and then the game ends. The winner is the player with the most victory points. Ties in Charterstone are considered friendly, which means it's entirely possible that multiple players will win the game. This also is the case for reputation and other ties in the game. A couple of other notes before we finish up the video. Players should notice the difference between story cards and rule cards. Don't play story 1 on rule 1 or vice versa. Unless playing solo, the rulebook recommends not using Ultimas until after game 1. After playing game 1, if you would like to use an Ultima, I will have a separate video explaining how to play with Ultimas, which you can find in a link in the description below. And that's how you play Charterstone. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope it's been helpful. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comments below and I will answer them to the best of my ability. Be sure to check out that FAQ over at Stonemeiergames.com. Now, of course, remember that this game is a legacy game, so more and more rules will be unlocked as you play, and more strategies will develop, more avenues for victory, and more complexity as well. So if you have any questions, like I said, leave them in the comments below. Also, if you do want to support the channel, there is a section in the comments that gives you several different methods for doing that, including a Pod Pledge website or Pod Pledge link. Until next time, if you're bored online, board offline.